Good morning. It is Tuesday, April 21st, and we are getting ready now to start chapter 16. We just completed chapter 10, which dealt with money and banking. One of the two categories of banks, commercial bank or thrift bank. We talked about the commercial banks being FDIC insured. And in part of my comments, as we talked about them, I said all commercial banks must follow the rules of the Fed. So we're going to start talking about the Fed or the Federal Reserve System. So as give me a moment here. Let me share my screen with you. So as we get ready to talk about the Fed, we got to understand a little bit why the Fed was created. So the Fed was created from a bank panic in 1907. So the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. So the bank panic of 1907, what this was when people lost faith in banking system, they would go to the banks and pull out their money. If you recall, banks operate under what's called fractional banking. They take part of your money, a small sliver, and they set it aside. They take the rest of the money, they loan it out. We discussed that banks sometimes run into problems when people default on their loans. Defaulting on a loan is when you don't pay the loan back. So these bank panics in the early 1900s were really because banks, there were things called wildcat banks, and banks would pop up all over the place. It's because they had no structure, they had no guidance, they had nobody above them telling them what to do. So people finally got fed up with it. So from 1907 to 1913, within Congress, they worked on creating, and they eventually did, what they called the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. If you notice, it took 4 years, whenever it officially started in 1913, it took 4 years for it to be signed, to pass Congress, to be signed by the president and put into effect. So they didn't do this haphazardly. They really looked into it. And I think one of the biggest things they wanted to take a look at is how do we structure it? See, the Fed was created by the government, but it's independent from government control. It's like you have the three branches of government: the executive, the judicial, and the legislative branch. The legislative branch creates the laws. The executive branch enforces the laws. That's just signing them, putting them into place. Judicial branch interprets it, tells us what they mean. They're all separate from each other. Okay, especially legislative and executive, and they need to work together to create the laws. If the Fed was created by the government and they were under government control, when you see what the Fed does eventually, you'll see that it's a good idea they're not under the government control, because the Fed controls the money supply. They look over it, they watch over it. If you noticed, or if you recall from watching the news, President Trump sent out stimulus checks. That is what's called fiscal policy. That is from the government. The Fed may do something totally opposite to counteract the effect of that if they don't think it was a good idea. This has happened before. The government does one thing and the Fed goes and does something totally different to create a balance between the two, because everybody on the Fed's nothing but an economist and a banker. So it's really good that they're separate, because the Fed controlling the money supply. If the government wanted more money, they would go to the Fed, and the Fed has to be able to say no. Yeah, you can't have it. So let's take a look at two of the main functions of the Fed. They want to create confidence. Okay, we need you guys, we need you to bank. If you recall, I gave you a banking fact that 25% of people in our society don't bank, or they're underbanked. Underbanked meaning that they use a bank that doesn't meet all their needs. Okay, so 25% of our society is not banking, or they're not banking efficiently enough. And we need to fix that. We need you to bank. We need you to have confidence in the banking system and everything that goes along with it. So this is what they do. This is what they do to give you confidence. They supervise member banks. They oversee them. All member banks, every commercial bank. Now remember, commercial banks are designed for the bigger businesses. All commercial banks are members of the Federal Reserve System. And then each thrift bank that wants to follow the Fed can, but they have to subject themselves to bank examinations. Okay, it's kind of like a physical of the bank, seeing how the money's going, stuff like that. It's a great thing. So all member banks get a yearly examination. Now, not every bank in Wadsworth gets one. I keep using Huntington because I don't know why, because that's where I bank, I guess. We have 3 Huntingtons in Wadsworth. Each one doesn't receive its own bank examination. The main bank of Huntington, which I think is in Columbus, gets the bank examination. All the records funnel into there. The second thing that the Fed has done to give us confidence is if the bank is struggling and they're hurting, they'll simply take them over. They'll remove leadership in the banks. They'll step in, they'll take them over, and they will make all decisions. They will do everything in their power not to allow that bank to close. Again, your money's safe. Your money's insured. And they want to make sure that you keep banking, make sure that you continue to have confidence. And we don't want, by one bank folding, even if it wasn't your bank, if you might sit back and think, well, wow, Huntington just went bankrupt. Maybe my money isn't safe in the bank, and you go to your bank and pull it out. That creates a bank panic. Bank panics typically are what we call bank runs. So the way they went about supervising member banks is that they took our country and they divided it into 12 regions. So when you sit now, this was done. Remember that this is the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. This is the original map, so to speak, from 1913. So you start with this little tiny district, which is number 1, and you have 2, 3, you have 4, 5, and you see how they're so small here to the east. And as we go further west, they get bigger. Well, in 1913, all the population was centered in this region right in here, in the northeastern part of the United States. And then, not nobody, but not many people were out west yet. So that's why that California area and Nevada and Oregon and Washington, that's why that last region is so big. So what they did is they assigned one main bank to each district. So there's 12 districts, and they assigned one main bank to each district: Boston, New York, Philadelphia. The main bank in the region in which we live in is Cleveland. Right downtown Cleveland is a Federal Reserve Bank, the main Federal Reserve Bank of the Cleveland district. They gave every bank a number and a letter. So let me see real quick, if you ever wanted to take a look at money. So this $1 bill right here in the upper corner, upper left-hand corner, and on a $1 bill, it has an I, and then off to the side is a 9. So this one, when this note was printed, it was sent to Minneapolis and then distributed from there. This $1 bill is K11 right there. So this one started in Dallas. C3 started in Philadelphia. D4 is from Cleveland. B2 is from New York. So I have, I don't know, several, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have $5 all in once, and they're all from 5 different banks. They weren't printed in those various regions. Once they were printed, that's where they were sent. So this is kind of so the Federal Reserve branch in Cleveland right here, and D4, they're in charge of supervising all the banks within their region. So what they did is they tried to do a little divide and conquer situation. And then as needed, every area obtained more branch banks as they needed more branch banks in here. And as you would assume most of the branches are out here in the San Francisco region. So they're lettered and numbered. Don't know really, honestly, I don't know why they have both a letter and a number. I don't know why they just go a number or a letter, but they did both, and that's their choice. So let's take a look at our Cleveland Federal Reserve District. We are lettered D4, okay? And our main bank is in Cleveland, but we have two branches. We have two branches in Cincinnati and Pittsburgh that do all the same functions of the Fed. And then we have what's called a check clearing Fed in Columbus. So we have actually two full branches that do all the same functions. Now, one of the things giving us confidence in a banking system is banks deposit money in the Federal Reserve System. So all that reserve ratio, all that fractional banking that they do, they don't keep it all in their own little vault here in Wadsworth. They make deposits each night. They make deposits each night at a Cleveland Fed, and they withdraw money as they need it. You could actually, prior to 9/11, used to be able to take a really nice tour of the Cleveland Fed. Now it's a much shortened one, but that is probably the most secure building in Ohio, without a doubt. The amount of security, the amount of security people with guns in there, they're all over the place. But we are D4, fully functioning Fed branches in Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, and nothing but a check clearing Fed in Columbus. And we'll get into all the functions of the Fed when I'm talking check clearing and that. So this isn't that big of a deal, but I'm just telling you, all of Ohio, part of Western PA, Eastern Kentucky, and part of West Virginia. But whoops, sorry, Loretta right here, the Cleveland Federal Reserve president. This is who our president is. So no idea where she lives, but what I do know is that at a point in time, she chaired what is considered by far the most powerful committee within the Federal Reserve System. The most powerful committee. They set the interest rates. They handled everything. She was the chairperson of that committee. So one of the most powerful bankers in our country lives somewhere close by us. Okay, so that is our Cleveland Federal Reserve president right here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the structure a little bit of the Federal Reserve. So we haven't talked about businesses yet, but businesses like our school district were run by boards. Okay, and the Fed is run by what's called a board of governors made up of 7 members. So the president, this is about really the only power the government has. Every board member is appointed by the president of the United States, and they're appointed for one term of 14 years. This is the longest appointed term available, with the exception of being appointed to the Supreme Court, which is a lifetime appointment until you retire or die. This is the second longest appointment out there that the president or the government can make. One term of 14 years. And a lot of people are like, why 14 years? Well, when we get into what they do with monetary policy is so slow moving that it takes, they want to be able to see that how their policy is working. So their term needs to be extra long. So they appoint a new member every 2 years. So President Trump's been in office just about 4 years now. We have an election coming up. So not knowing the exact cycle of the Board of Governors, he's made at least one appointment to the Board of Governors, maybe 2, but I believe he's made at least one appointment to the Board of Governors, and probably we'll get one more in before the election or right after the election. So a new member every 2 years. And the reason only one member at a time, it's so you don't do all 7 members at one time, because you want consistency. And what they do is they oversee the entire banking system. They kind of have their hand in everything. All those different 12 regions, they report back to the Board of Governors. And the Board of Governors meets in Washington, D.C. And what they do is they set policy and they create monetary policy. We'll get into monetary policy in great detail. board set policy. So right now, our Board of Education is setting policies on how the rest of this year is going to look like. Mr. Moore, Dr. Hill can make all the recommendations they want, but it is not official until the board sets it. So what they do is they set policies for banks, policies related to banking, and they create monetary policy. And then the one thing that they do is they report to Congress. I'm sure they're reporting to Congress on what's going on economically right at the moment. Our unemployment rate's at 10%, maybe a little higher by now. Our flow of money is slowing around. So that means people have less money. They're banking less. I'm sure they're probably borrowing less. So they're going to report to them on all those matters. And they're constantly in front of the Board of Governors. They're constantly in front of Congress, reporting what's going on and recommendations, suggestions. The president appoints a chairman and a vice chairman of the Fed for a 4-year term. So currently, here we go. Currently, our chairman is Jerome Powell. Okay, as I'm looking at the screen, he's on my left-hand side. He was appointed in 2018. So we know President Obama made that appointment. So that Jerome or Randall, one of those two are the ones that the majority of the time are appearing before Congress and talking to them about all that's going on with our economy. And they're the ones that represent the Federal Reserve System. So what we're going to do is we're going to stop with this assignment. Okay. I'm going to have some questions for you in a moment. I'm going to ask you a random question right now. I'm going to tell you the answer as soon as I get this out here. See who's been watching this video. But if you've been obviously paying attention, and let me close out of this real quick here. And as we sit here, you always see in the background, I have 2 jerseys hanging there. The jersey on my right is my son's jersey. And the jersey on my left is from when I coached at Revere. That is the jersey we wore in the state championship. So I'm going to ask you about these 2 jerseys. So hopefully you were paying attention. Guys, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Take care. Have a great evening. Bye.